welcome back to Making It. My name is Mirabelle. On the podcast, I have spoken to a lot of musicians, some filmmakers, and on occasion, there are people who do both of these things. Today, I'm talking to Daniel Broadley, who is a filmmaker, a director, a DP, photographer, and also a musician. He's one half of the band Meadowlark, and if you followed along with this podcast, you might recall that last week we had Kate McGill, who is, well, the other half. So we get the whole band on the podcast. Very exciting. For the filmmaking side of Daniel, he does a lot of music video work, and so he talks about working with small indie bands all the way up to international pop stars like Nick Jonas, which is really interesting if you've ever wondered kind of all the different hats that you have to wear for that. On the music side of things, it was really insightful to hear more about Meadowlark and how they kind of went from playing huge national shows and being on the radio all the time to rediscovering and returning to their roots where they're writing music in a way that feels good for them and they're not just trying to cater to the masses and write a pop hit every single time. And it really goes to show that you don't have to be a touring musician who only plays live shows for 1 billion people to make it. Like, you can do it in ways that feel comfortable and feel good for you. All right, to wrap up this intro before I end up just like regurgitating everything that we've talked about, if you like it, please rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment, leave a like. I would love to say hello back to you. And if you want to get involved with the podcast and ask your questions, you can sign up for Patreon. Links to that, links to myself, Daniel, all in the description. I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, well, welcome to Making It. Thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I spoke to Kate McGill recently-ish, a couple weeks ago, who is the other half of Meadowlark, the band that you're in. So it's cool. It's nice to have both of you on the podcast.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear some of her answers to some of the questions, because we have quite we sometimes overlap on things, and other times we really clash on ideas. But I think that's kind of what makes the band work so well.
Oh yeah, you saying that I immediately thought of Nightstorm. That song that you guys did together.
Yeah, we wrote with a guy called Erland Cooper, who's this amazing composer, songwriter. And his exercise for us was just to go into different rooms and just write melodies and lyrics and then come back in and sing them at exactly the same time. So we just heard each other sing it for the first time together. And it was a really good exercise. Not something you could do all the time, but we hit kind of a part where I think the piece Kate had written was like 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. So it wasn't really like a traditional song. And it was kind of a nice way to just make something of it. Because at that point we were trying to write singles. And I'm sure as a songwriter, you kind of get this formula in your head and then you repeat the formula and it gets you get kind of tired of the same thing, even though it's the traditional structure of songwriting. It's verse, chorus, etc. And you can add pre-choruses and whatever, but there's always that. For it to be a pop song, essentially, it kind of follows that formula. But this was fun to just go, well, it's not going to be a single, it's not going to be a radio song, so let's just have fun with it.
Yeah, that's super cool. So like a lot of the people I have on, I know them through Twitch, like I've connected with them through Twitch streaming, but you're not on Twitch.
I'm not on Twitch, no. I'm actually not I'm not super great in front of the camera. Maybe because I spend so much time behind it, so this is like a rare thing for me. But I get used to it from being in Meadowlark, and but it's not something I love doing. And yeah, Twitch is I have high praise for people that can keep up with Twitch, because it's a lot of work. And I have friends on it. Kate was on it for a while, and some other friends that do it regularly, and it takes a lot of work and to keep it interesting and fresh as well. So yeah, kudos to you.
So the question is, when are you going to join Kate on one of her streams?
That's a good question. But John, we almost did it a while ago, actually. And I can't remember why. Yeah, it didn't happen. I think it was maybe like the 4th birthday of our album or something. And we were going to go on together and do something. I think I ended up getting a job, which happens a lot. And she said I kind of dodged a bullet apparently, because it was just a particularly quiet day. She streams, so
Aw.
but it was, yeah, I probably will one day. I feel like, especially now we're kind of doing some bits and bobs together again. I feel like, and we're really enjoying playing together. I think we got into a weird state with the last album we put out with Nightstorm, where a lot of the songs were kind of production songs, like production heavy songs. Even though they didn't sound it, they weren't songs we kind of like sat in a room together with two guitars and wrote. They were like, you know, an idea where I started with a drum beat or Kate started with a melody, and we kind of built the songs up that way. And I feel like that's cool, but you sort of lose the love of just playing them together with just the raw instruments. And I feel like with what we're doing at the moment, and maybe what's to come, you know, we're just kind of getting used to being each other's company again now. And I think I feel like that stuff we're writing just in a room together with no computers. Like, we're not really opening Logic or Ableton or anything. We're just writing it with what's in front of us. And I think that's probably been the best thing for us, to be honest.
That's awesome. That's really
it's
cool.
really exciting. How about you, Dom? Can I ask you with writing, do you like gravitate towards using the computer, or do you prefer to kind of like start on something that's just, you know, an acoustic instrument essentially?
Yeah, I prefer to pretty much just start with my acoustic guitar, pick it up, play a couple chords, find a nice riff or something, and then just kind of be mumbling random words that don't actually make any sense. And then, you know, usually a melody will come through or something, and then I build upon that. It starts to form, starts to make sense at some point.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's similar to us. We're not really, lyrics come second for us. It's always melody and chords first, and then we kind of like slot the lyrics in depending on how we feel. Like we kind of get used to enunciating the melody a certain way, and then we try and fit the words in, which can be a real pain because you get so attached to these. I call them yogurt lyrics, where they're sort of, they don't make any sense. They're just completely garbage. But you know, it's it's just interesting that we construct songs the same way.
Yeah. When you guys are writing together, though, like, does anybody take over more of the instrumental part or the lyrics or anything like that?
Yeah, I think because it's Kate's voice, I think Kate kind of takes the lead. And I've always been a Kate fan. Like, before we started a band together, I was a fan of her solo stuff. So I still kind of get enamored with her when she brings something to the table, and I sort of sit in the room for the first time and hear her sing something she's got. And sometimes, like, nothing needs to happen. It's amazing as it is, and maybe I fill in some gaps. And other times I can just hear where it could go. Like, I feel like it's most of the way there, but maybe the verse should change, or there should be a different chord somewhere. Or so I'm very much like, especially the newer stuff we're doing at the moment, what we're trying to write together. It feels like that's a lot more of her leading the way, and I think it's because she's found her voice again, and she lost that for a while in amongst going through a whole bunch of stuff in her personal life. And so I feel like now she's got this confidence back in herself and her songwriting. So it's been kind of amazing for me to come in and facilitate that. And in some instances, that's all I'm doing. I'm just encouraging her to kind of move forward with that song. But it's weird how, because she started releasing solo material now,
Right.
Again, but it's so funny that when she writes a song, sometimes it just is a Meadowlark song. I don't know. We don't know why exactly, but she'll send me an idea and we'll both be like, this feels like a Meadowlark song. And yet other times she'll write something and it'll feel like, something that just could be her solo material. So it's and we haven't figured out what that is yet. There's just a feeling. I guess it's an excitement we both get when we hear something.
Do we get to hear more of your singing on what you're working now?
Yeah, quite a lot more actually.
Oh yes, love it.
I think it's interesting because, like, no one really knows it, but when we first started Meadowlark back in like 2012 maybe, I think it was 2012. I was the lead singer in my band at the time, and when we started Meadowlark, we kind of both were doing joint vocal duties. And it's really interesting how, like, I guess it didn't make sense at the time. We weren't working together at all. I had a very loud, very out of tune voice from coming from this rock band, and Kate had this very soft voice, which was like, they just didn't fit in the same space. But over time, I feel like from just harmonizing with her and singing in unison, I've kind of learned where my voice can fit with her. And it's been this amazing thing now when we're writing together that it's like, I feel like I can put my voice in there and it works really well. It sort of like gels together. So it's really exciting. And I mean, Kate's always going to be the lead singer of the band for sure, because it's just, she is Meadowlark. Her voice is Meadowlark, but it's quite fun to use my voice as like a way to kind of boost that, or to like kind of, I don't know. It's just interesting I use it more like an instrument rather than trying to take the lead platform on stuff but it's fun.
That's super cool. It must be like, it's super fun when like two voices can gel together, and it seems it's great. It works out really well.
Definitely. But it's definitely something which some artists that have got it right, like I maybe I'm not explaining that very well. I feel like there's certain artists that just figure out how it works, and it works really well. And I think we have only just got to that point now, really. Maybe from Nightstorm, actually, just hearing that work and being like, okay, there's actually room for this to happen now. So yeah, but it's exciting. It's fun. It's given us a whole different way of writing songs again. Yeah. Which after almost 10 years, you're looking for new ways to get excited about being in the same room as someone else and writing songs with them. So it's... Yeah.
Is it like confusing singing Nightstorm together in the same room?
Yeah, because I'd written the lyrics and then read them off the sheet when we first recorded it and then never sang it again. And so we put a version of it up the other day. And when we recorded that version, like a live version of it, I had to have the lyrics in front of me because I just had I didn't listen to it very much after we'd done it. And I just, really struggled to remember why I'd sang what I sung. It didn't come back to me at all. I guess because it was more like it felt more like a spoken word piece, I guess, because I was sort of like, we both didn't think about the lyrics very hard. We just went away for 15 minutes, wrote down like a bunch of sentences, came back. We didn't even try a rehearsal. I think we literally just sang it. So for me, it was strange because I was like trying to fit the sentences in the song. And it was a one take wonder. We just did one version, walked away with it. Yeah. Cause it was kind of like, it was essentially a demo. In fact, the whole second record is essentially demos that we did together. And when we signed with our second label, Guesstimate, they were just so happy with how they were sounding. They were like, I think we just need to polish these up and put these out. So it was an interesting album for us because we're both a bit, I guess, jaded from that because it didn't feel like we finished it properly, or we didn't give the songs a chance to go and take them to someone else and see what they could put into them. It was kind of just us two fumbling our way through learning how to work Logic. And it felt, and some of them work. I think some of them work really well, and some of them feel to me and Kate maybe like too much like the original demo. And no one heard the demos, so
nobody knows.
No one knows. Yeah, exactly. And we're trying to tell ourselves that's just how we're overthinking it. But I think there's something to be said about working with producers, especially when you're in a duo, having that third person to kind of to be the mediator almost when you're trying to make decisions and kind of cut through the middle of you and say, well, you guys are both arguing about which way the song should go. I think it should go here. And then it becomes this kind of compromise. And I think we work better, I think, with that dynamic because we're both so precious about songs. Production for us can be quite painful because you're taking the song and then like pulling it in a way you maybe didn't think about, that it would go.
Yeah.
And so we're getting better at it now, like relinquishing control a little bit and letting the song just find its way, because there's 1,000 different ways you could produce a song, and you spend the whole time thinking, should it be this way? Should it be halftime? Should there be no beat at all? Should we put more layers on? Like and there's no right or wrong answer. And at some point, someone's just got to say, this is just how the song should be. And I think having that third person is really good to have that.
Having an extra ear is always really helpful.
Yeah.
But also like your ego maybe won't like that very much.
And the ego is a big problem. And I think we're trying to get better at it now because there's less expectations from people around us and ourselves, because we're no longer with our record label.
Right.
And so the idea of having control of our music is really exciting, and it feels like there's less people who are pressuring us to go a certain direction or hoping we write songs in a certain way so they serve a purpose that suits them. and more often than not, it's the idea of radio songs or songs which have simple choruses for syncs and things. And I think they don't always. I don't think we haven't had an experience where someone's outright said that to us, but you can just tell in the way that people get excited about some of your songs and not about the other ones, that they have an agenda and that they have a wish for you to go a certain route. And I think, and rightly so, they're giving you money often, and there's a reason, and they often have a track record of success. So that's like, you often listen to them. But I think for us, we're less excited about that part of making music now, and more excited about connecting with people and telling truthful stories and writing music which feels more honest to us, and not to try and tick a box or to gain an accolade from something. I think it's yeah, it's sort of almost going back to what it kind of always should have been. I think we got into the deep end maybe a bit too fast. I think there was quite a lot of hype around Kate starting a band, and I think with that meant that as soon as we put one demo out, we had like a lot of labels after us and a lot of interest, and I say that because that's not gloating either. I think it was wrong for it to happen that way, and it felt. And at the time, we just thought, wow, we've skipped like 5-6 years of just jumped into the end of the queue, and actually we missed all of that opportunity to find our feet and to experiment and to, I don't know, just get comfortable with what kind of songwriters we want to be. We just figured out. Well, we just figured we could just jump in and just become a successful band, and we're now reverse engineering it and going back to like what it should be, and not thinking about any of that stuff, not gigs and playlists and anything like that. We're just thinking about the songs themselves and what serves them best and what serves us best. And if anyone likes them, then that's great. That means we've done something right. And if not, then we've just made something we're really happy with, and that's also cool too.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we get too caught up in like, how do we make money from this, or like, how can we get viral? How can we get more views? How can we, have more attention on our music? Because I guess that's what success is to a lot of people. And it's hard not to be like, yeah, it's hard to say you don't want that, because, money is nice. And it is, that's kind of the way to make something your career. But it is nice that you guys are kind of going back to the roots and like just making music because it feels good and you're connecting with an audience and people, and just the basic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think, and I think we're kind of hoping that maybe with a more honest direction that people will find it easier to connect with us. I think we became a bit of a billboard for a while of like marketing posts about, hey, we've put out a song, listen to this, or hey, we have a gig, come to the gig. And it's like, I think now we're just keen to just connect with people, and and make it more one-to-one and less thinking about the masses of it all, because I think for so long the idea of building this audience became faceless, and I think it works nicer when you recognize people who are kind of connecting with you more often and having a rapport with people. And I think we're both keen to make that more of a thing, and it allows us to be ourselves a bit more and less like a machine. And I think because we don't enjoy being a machine at all, so
yeah. So do you think that producing music is similar in any way to maybe storyboarding for a film or music video like that?
Maybe. That's an interesting question. I haven't really thought about it that way. I mean, there's certainly similarities in filmmaking and music, I think. But equally, I feel like for me, I like to keep those two worlds quite separate, other than when I have to maybe make video content for Meadowlark and it becomes a weird mixture. But I think, I guess there are similarities, but ultimately I think songwriting is different because it's so internal. And I think storyboarding and writing shot lists and constructing a music video is so external, because you're never really making a music video for yourself. It's for consumption in a way that is instantly for someone. Yeah, like you'd never meet someone who goes, I just make, maybe they do, but I make music videos for fun, just for me to watch at home myself. That's less common than someone saying, I just sit home and write songs for myself. True. I think, it's a different, I think, and music videos are serving a purpose to a song that exists. It's like another layer to something that's already had that work done. I think for me, nothing compares to songwriting when I really think about it. I think it's so, maybe why I'm so addicted to doing it, because it's just nothing else like it. It's the most vulnerable you can ever be.
Yeah.
And especially when you're writing with someone else and they're sort of listening to you fumble your way through something, which could be quite embarrassing if you're not hitting notes or not finding a good melody. So it is interesting, and yet the reward of it is fantastic, because it feels like you've just given birth to something that's never existed before. I mean, of course, there's only a certain amount of chords and melodies, so the chances are the song definitely exists somewhere in a very similar format. But when you first write it, you feel like you've just manifested something that's never existed out of thin air.
It's the coolest thing.
It's amazing, and you're sort of enamored with the thing you've just done, and it doesn't even feel like egotistical or arrogant. I don't think it's different, because I mean, it's obviously not like this, because I would never compare it to, but I can imagine like the idea of holding this baby you just made, because as soon as you've made it, it's not yours anymore. Suddenly it just exists in front of you like an orb or something, and it's just glowing, and you're like, I just made this, like we just made this. And it came from nowhere. Half an hour ago we just didn't have any of it, and now we have all of it, and it's amazing. And I think filmmaking is slightly different, because it's you're adding on top of that, and you're taking that thing that's had all of that work done quietly in a room somewhere that no one's ever heard, and then finding a way to create a visual mood for it. I suppose that's how I look at it. I think less about making stories for music videos, because I don't think you can tell a story that well in 3.5 minutes when it's just to the song. Some people can, and I maybe it's not my forte, but I think for me, it's more about finding, like, translating what the audio feels like into something visual, so that when you're watching it, you're sort of like, there's something that matches it together, and it helps you just further stimulate what the audio is doing to you.
That's interesting.
But other people definitely are more, they want a beginning, a middle, and end. They want a story. They want a resolution. And I think, and I, if I was making a short film or a narrative film, of course that would be where I go. But I think music's, sometimes the music video can distract from the song, and I think that's doing the wrong thing. You almost don't really want to be thinking too much about the video, because you want the song to be seeping into you as you're watching, and the video should only really serve a purpose to further push that song further into you. So
that kind of sounds like explaining like film scores to movies. Like, if you're watching a film, the soundtrack isn't really what's at the forefront. It's just kind of there to add to the film.
Yeah. Sometimes you don't even realize it's happening.
Yeah.
And then you sort of, if you really take it, I mean, well, the most interesting thing to do is take a soundtrack off a film and see whether the film still gives you that feeling. Because more often than not, music's got this amazing ability, as we all know, to kind of to instill a mood and to instill a feeling and an emotion. And I think movies, obviously very early on in the history of Hollywood films and feature films, figured that out. They figured out that a scene could be enhanced by music, and therefore now it's reliant on it. Which is even more impressive when sometimes you watch films that don't have a score, or have like got a very minimal score, and they've used other devices to give you that same feeling. But music ultimately, I mean, sometimes it can be a bit of a cheat code. Sometimes I feel like you watch a film and you're like, the score starts building up, and you're like, oh, it's telling me to feel a certain way, and I feel like I'm not being shown it yet, but it's telling me, and it's probably going to happen at some point. Like an indicator.
I actually think that a lot of films nowadays that I want to watch is largely because of the film score, and because I've heard so many great things about it, that I'm like, oh, I want to hear this music in the context of the film, instead of it being like, oh, I want to watch this film because of its story.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's certainly films where I feel like they've figured out the marketing strategy is how good the soundtrack is, because they've got the right collaborators involved, and that's what they kind of push further forward. And I think it's amazing that people are recognizing the work of composers and songwriters within film, because I think they are such a powerful part of the process, and quite often left till the end and overlooked, but actually they can be really powerful. And now some of the best movies, I think, get the people involved really early on. On a bigger scale, someone like Christopher Nolan brings Hans Zimmer on so early into the process. Like, he's got maybe just a synopsis or a sentence of an idea, and he'll be like, right, I'll get like a motif written up for this, just to maybe
fun.
inform me as I write the rest of it. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. You mentioned that some films didn't even need music, and they figured it out. And that just reminded me of, I think the last film that like that happened for me was Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
I haven't seen this film yet, but I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that there wasn't a score. Like,
right, yeah.
Until after I finished watching it, and I wanted to search up all the stuff about the film and like all the behind the scenes things, and I realized then that there actually wasn't any music in it. And I still felt so many emotions and everything. Like it was still amazing.
I think silence can be a really powerful soundtrack, and I think and it's not used enough. And that's something actually that Meadowlark, going back to that again, we kind of were making our songs too busy at one point, and I think we weren't respecting how much space and silence, and that can become such a huge part of how a song is listened to. And I think writing now, we're kind of not scared about space and letting just chords breathe and not filling it with pad sounds and loads of things. And not that I'm against those things, they're lovely, and I love music that becomes a wash of sound. But I think it's been really good to recognize that it doesn't need to be on every song. And I think sometimes silence is a really powerful thing.
How do you juggle all of your different projects? Because you are part of Meadowlark, you got your music side of things, and you are also filmmaker, director, DP, all that stuff.
Yeah, I do a lot. I don't know how I juggle it. I kind of just can't imagine life without either of them, and I think therefore I always find a way to make it work. I mean, it comes at an expense. I'm often quite burnt out from juggling both, especially when we were touring more. I think that became quite tricky with doing a stint on the road where we weren't making much money, and then coming back and having to work double to kind of make up for the time I just spent on the road not making any money. So it's tough, but I think I don't think I'd enjoy either of them without having the other one to escape to. And I feel like when the filmmaking stuff gets me down, like any creative thing you do, and I'm sure you know this as well, like there's periods where you just feel like should I still be doing this, and you just have this self-doubt because of maybe it's not gone well for a short while. And when that happens, I tend to sort of run to the other thing even harder. And that's really good for me, I think, because it reminds me that, I don't suck. It's just there's a period where some things aren't connecting. And then I can come back in with a bit of a fresh perspective and a feeling of like triumph, maybe, I guess, because we maybe went and did something really great in the other thing, like in music. And then I can come back to the filmmaking and be like, okay, like now I feel good about myself again, and I can put that energy back into this. But yeah, no, it's hard juggling both. I won't lie.
Do you think it's possible for you to have any interests or hobbies that you don't turn into a career?
Yes, I actually got really into surfing a couple of years ago. I say really into it. I only do it a couple times a year, but I have no desire to become really good at it. I think it's like, I look at the guys at the back and the girls at the back on these huge waves, and I don't think I want to do that. I just enjoy being, with the party waves at the front, getting splashed about. And I think that's probably been quite good for me, just to have something I can go and do for fun and not feel like I need to be the best person at it.
Yeah.
Because with music and film, there's certainly a level of wanting to succeed in those things. And success doesn't always mean like, I don't know, money or fame. In fact, would never want fame. I don't think I wouldn't be able to handle that. And what comes with it. But certainly you want your art to be received in a certain way critically. And I think that to me kind of sums up that external success, I suppose. But the older I get, the less that becomes important, I think. You recognize some of the fragility in those concepts, and that actually when me and Kate reminisce about the band, we never really say the best times were the big gigs we got, support gigs, or the moments where we got played on national radio and those kind of things. We talk about like writing songs together in small spaces and car journeys, and it's the little things in between. And I think when you realize those are the things you really remember and care about, you sort of wonder why you bother so much fighting to do all the big things, because they don't really, you don't really remember them. They're more like I don't know, like a trip or something, like a sort of like a drunken night. They feel like a high that is that's temporary and wears off, and whereas the things that fill your core memories are like these interactive moments where it's the bits in between.
Yeah, those moments that get really, that I guess bring out more emotion in you, and that's why I remember those moments better, I guess. Yeah.
So it's I think that's just, I'm trying to focus a bit more on that now, I think, than
that's great.
than becoming the best person at everything, because it's never going to happen. So
yeah, well, I say that because like I'm also really into film and photography and all of that stuff, and so when I am not doing music, I'm also just doing photo video things. But cool. It seems like I also am kind of turning that into like a bit of a career thing, doing photography gigs and all of that. And like, I don't really know what I have as a hobby that I just do solely as a hobby.
Yeah. You're right to bring it up. I think it's important to have things which aren't monetized, because suddenly everything becomes a stressor, because it's a financial, and we get used to there being a certain, I guess, recouping a certain amount from what we're making. And I think it's that can kill the original or the initial love for it, I suppose, because it becomes a business venture. But the great thing about those mediums are there's layers to them. There's like different levels. And, I think for me, for example, I made filmmaking a kind of career, but then photography for me, I don't really do many paid gigs with photography. That to me is still very much a hobby, and a way I can take out a camera and load it with some film if I'm doing film photography, and just like snap away. And I know that those photos have there's no money to be gained from that. I'm just spending money, but I'm getting a kick out of it in a way that I wouldn't get if I was getting paid to do it, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's definitely ways you can work within those subjects to find hobbies within them. But
Yeah. So how did you kind of get started with film and video stuff?
So I was in Plymouth, which is down in the southwest of England, kind of near Cornwall on the coastline, and
it means nothing to me.
Yeah, it's just right down the bottom. And it was a weird city where a lot of people go on holiday to Cornwall. That's kind of like our holiday, region of England, and Plymouth is right next to that place, but you don't need to go through Plymouth to get to Cornwall. So it's sort of just like forgotten about. Even when I say the word Plymouth in England, people were like, "Where is that?" And it's like, so it's this weird city, because it was technically a city because it had a cathedral, but it's the smallest city ever. It's tiny, and very kind of deprived. It's not a lot going on there. No industry at all. It's about a 4 or 5 hour drive from London, which in England means you're kind of like, that's, quite far away from it. So there wasn't much industry. So there wasn't much hope, basically. And I think growing up, all I did was skate, basically. And then I got into like Nirvana and started a rock band. And I just knew that those are the two things I loved doing. And I couldn't really imagine doing anything else, despite career advisors saying you should do something else. So when it came to finishing secondary school, which essentially is our like final mandatory education side of things, and you can choose what you want to go do next. You can go into work, you can go into college or whatever. I just decided to go and do filmmaking at college, and it was really a way just to kill time, because I was in a rock band and assumed I was going to be some big rock star one day. So I just was like, I need to do something to kill the time, and I don't want to get a job, so I'll go to college. And I enjoy making skate films, so I have some understanding of holding a camera. And that was all I did. I just kind of muddled my way through college, doing the bare minimum. I didn't really have a love for any of the modules. I didn't really enjoy any other side of filmmaking other than making skate films. And I finished college and then did a degree. So I went into university at Plymouth as well, doing filmmaking, again, just killing time, because my band, we were sort of touring at that point and still assuming that at some point that was going to take off. And then something happened in the last year, and I don't know what exactly, but I think I suddenly just found my voice in filmmaking because I was having to do the modules anyway to pass each year. I was having to do the bare minimum and just actually try and finish the projects. And I think I must have done something that I suddenly felt like I had a flair for. And I think it was because I tried to make a narrative film with no talking. It was just to a soundtrack. It was basically a music video, but it was more of a cinematic music video done to like a more of a cinematic soundtrack rather than to a song. And I just remember feeling like this works actually. And my classmates and peers were really impressed by it as well. And I felt like that, okay, so this, I kind of enjoyed the reaction of them saying they enjoyed it. And I felt like, okay, this is actually, I'm getting a similar kick out of this as I would to play a gig where people were watching, wanting to watch. And then from then onwards, I just kind of got addicted to it. And so that was right in the last year. That was the 5th year of education in film. It took that long for me to go to kind of get it. And then I never looked back, basically. I just, once I figured out that I could put visuals to song in a way that I figured out this formula that worked, basically, in my head. There's certain shots that worked, and the editing style, I just couldn't stop, basically. I finished university, spent the last batch of money I had on a camera, and just started asking friends in bands if they wanted a music video for £50. And then if they said yes, I'd charge them £100 next time. And then someone would see that video who I didn't know, so I'd charge them double that. I just kept doubling. Yeah, I just kept doubling the money until at some point the band said, I don't think we can afford that. So I was like, well, that's the cap then. And it was in 2011, I think it was probably. So over 10 years ago now. And it was around the time there was a really big YouTube boom. I think bands, much how a band now would have TikTok, and that's a big part of their marketing. And just before then it was Instagram. It was like, had to have a really good Instagram. Back then it was YouTube, and bands just wanted music videos. That was their way of promoting themselves. And I'm not saying it isn't now, but then it was the only thing they cared about. It's like, as long as we have a good music video, that's all they thought they needed. And in some cases, that's all they did need, because the YouTube community was so busy and so booming.
Right.
So I just hoovered up every band that wanted, a good looking music video. And I was kind of charging, I think it was £800 at that point. And it would just be me and a camera, and I'd have one assistant, and we basically do everything outside. Because the bands couldn't afford more than that fee, and I wanted to make that as my fee, so I couldn't pay for locations and lighting and things, because that would just take all the money away. Or if I charged it to them, they would say that's too much money. So almost every video was a sunset in a forest or in a field or on a cliff or something, because I knew I could make that look really attractive. And yeah, it was fun. I got a chance to experiment for about probably 2 or 3 years. And slowly but surely bands were coming to me with a bit more money each time. So I could afford maybe a location but no lighting, and then eventually a location and lighting, and then I could afford a makeup artist, and suddenly the crews grew very, very naturally. It was never an obvious jump until I got represented by a production company. And they weren't an established production company, I might add. They were just a bunch of kids the same age as me who were like, we think we can blag some of the bigger pitches, the sort of briefs that the major labels were. And there's no other way to get those unless you are you're represented, basically. It's rare that a young independent filmmaker would get the opportunity to do a big Sony music video. And maybe it happens more now, but back then it was definitely unheard of. So they started a production company, and I was the first director to be represented by them. And then I got my first Sony pitch, which would have been 2012 or 13, for a band called Don Broco, like a rock band who I've worked with many years since as well. And I think it was £8,000 budget, which to me at the time was insane.
Sounds like a lot.
Yeah, I'd only worked with like maybe £2,000 max at that point. So I was dreaming up all these things we could do. But the reality was it was still relatively low budget, and but we made something really fun. And I think once they'd started that company, I'd done one of those videos. The ball just started rolling at that point, and I started getting more pitches come through from major labels and bigger budgets, and I got an opportunity to be a director, because at that point as well, I'd been shooting and directing. I'd never really had a director of photography work with me before.
Did you edit any of the videos, or were you just directing?
No, I still continue to edit quite a lot, mainly because I'm quite proficient at editing, and it's always been something I've been quite good at. Probably because I did skate films, and I've always had an idea of how music should or film should cut to music. And it's when you're dealing with music video budgets, there's never enough money. So if there's ways you can save money, so for example, me editing, but I wouldn't get paid for it, but it means we can save that bit of money and put it into getting a cooler bit of kit or a nicer location. It's only more recently now I've really had editors doing videos for me, and I really enjoy it now, because I think it removes you a little bit from what you shot on the day, because I think you get attached to the wrong thing sometimes. Sometimes the things you most love that you captured aren't serving the film at all, and you only want it because you remember how cool it looked at the time, or how long it took to set it up or something. And the reality is it's not doing anything. So you just an editor would skim through it. They wouldn't have any affiliation to the process of the shot. They just look at it and go, does that fit? No. In the bin. And it's and it's way nicer, because when you see the final video, then you're seeing it for what it should be, rather than your memory of it on the set. So I really enjoy now having an editor edit my work. I've sort of become a bit like, I don't enjoy editing as much now, because I'm so used to someone else doing it and me watching the film like almost as if I'm an audience member, and I get to enjoy it like someone who's watching it for the first time, and it's really fun.
How different is it from like what you had in mind when you were directing on set and all that, and the final product?
Sometimes it's really similar. I often have like an edit plan. In fact, when you talked about storyboards before, I actually write edit plans more than storyboards. I kind of map the song out by structure. So like, 0 seconds to 15 seconds is verse 1, and then vice versa for the whole song basically. And then I map out what's happening in each part, so that I can almost watch the video on paper first in my head and see if it flows, and then I can write a shot list from that and say, okay, well, in verse 1, 3, and the middle 8, we're in this location, so I need to write a shot list to make sure we capture everything there. So often I'll have that, and I'll give that to an editor and say, like, this is kind of the template, but within that, how they cut it and which shots they choose from, because we're never just shooting like exactly to that shot plan. We're doing full takes of the song. We're suddenly getting excited and running over the other side of the room because the light's doing something by the window. We're just capturing extra things, and when they've got that all in front of them, they've maybe got my plan to look at, but then they can diverge and they can go off and and just find those amazing moments we captured on the day, and put those in somehow.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's fun. It's great. It's the more collaboration is involved, the more I love the projects. I think I find the lower budget things where I'm often still DPing and directing and editing at the same time, I enjoy those less, because I'm not sharing that as much, and I'm not getting surprised. One of my favorite things, and it's similar to songwriting, it's my favorite things, is when I've written an idea for a song, and I send it to Kate, and I assume I know what she's going to do melody wise, and she comes back with something, I'm just like, this is unbelievable. I think my favorite version of that was our song Lightning. I sent her the full produced demo of that, which is the same version we released. And I was going to use it for myself. I'd kind of written it about something completely different to what she wrote it about. But I sent her the instrumental anyway, and just said, like, what do you think of this? And then within like an hour, she'd like written the lyrics and the melodies, and she sent it back, and I'd never heard those melodies over that song. I couldn't imagine how she'd come up with the just the placement of it all. But I was so surprised. It made me love the song in a totally different way. And I think filmmaking is the same. People come get involved and just show you something, and you're like, I can't believe you've come up with this, because it's like, I already had an idea for what this was going to be today, and now you're doing something which is exceeding that, and it's amazing.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm just going to turn a lamp on quickly, because it's definitely getting quite dark.
for like music videos, like how much of your ideas, it's like I guess similar to like the how much the final product is your vision versus the editor's vision. Like how much is like the artist or the band's vision versus your vision for the music video?
I think the bigger the artist, the less control you have, for sure. I remember I did a video for Nick Jonas in 2021, so last year, and I had an idea that was a sequel to his big video from that first campaign. What was the song called again? I can't remember what the song was called. It
starts with this.
No, This Is Heaven is the one I did, but there was the one before. I think maybe Spaceman, I think it was called, or like maybe I'm getting mixed up with someone else though. Anyway, this is really bad that I can't remember. But anyway, the first video he put out was him, stuck on a planet, and then at the end he jetpacks off. And I remember thinking, okay, I got the opportunity to write an idea, and I said to the record label, like, it feels like that there should be a sequel to that. I think it even said to be continued at the end of the video. And I was like, so should we continue it? And they said, well, if you write a sequel, we'll probably go with that because, it makes sense for the campaign. And I was like, brilliant. I'll write a sequel. And I wrote one where he lands in England and it's abandoned. He's at the space station and there's no one left on the world essentially apart from him. And he's having to figure out how to come to terms with that. And it was a really cool idea. But the night before the shoot, we had a conversation and he hadn't heard the idea yet and he didn't want it to be space related at all. But by this point, this was the night before the shoot, we already had the space station looking location. All the props were space related. The whole idea was space related. Yeah. There was no way to not have a space related video. And so I had to very quickly figure out how to sort of make it not just a space video and make it something else. So the artist can, and that's fine. It's his song, it's his vision. So I'm there to serve that. But it's, it can take you, your idea can suddenly become something very different. And it was, and that happens a lot at that level. I think, the artists are very attached to what they're doing and they can quite often change their minds. And, and when they're giving you that much money to make something, they kind of have the say. There's no way to really, to fight them on that because they'll just be like, well, we'll get someone else who will do what we want to do. So you sort of have to try and find the middle ground and collaborate with them so that your idea is still in there, but it's also serving their idea too. Yeah. But it's not easy. It's quite tricky. And sometimes where I don't like the low budget videos because I'm doing all the jobs at once, I really like them because I have a lot more control in bringing my own vision to life because there's less money. So they're less picky. I think they're aware that like whatever they get back is going to be useful rather than, so it's, I have a lot more control in those situations and I love collaborating. So I really enjoy bringing the artist in. I would never write something and say, I don't care what your opinion is. We should just make this because I know it's going to be really good. I think it's way cooler to say like, here's an initial idea. What do you think of it? And then see if it sparks ideas from them because then they're getting excited about your concept and they're building on what you've already got. And I think that's really fun then because you're just building blocks together, much like songwriting again, I guess, until eventually you get to the end and you're like, okay, we've got an idea here. This actually works really well. And let's go and make it. So yeah.
That's cool. It's cool how you've like kind of, it seems like you've grown pretty organically, naturally from like working with small indie bands to international pop stars like Nick Jonas.
Yeah. I think there's a real beauty in both. I think a lot of people assume that I would stop doing the smaller budget work and just try and go for the bigger stuff. And I still pitch regularly on bigger budget pieces, but I don't think I could ever stop doing the lower budget stuff because it's also an amazing time to experiment. When you get the bigger jobs, it has to be planned to a T, and you can't really go and make it up as you're going along. Whereas the smaller ones, you can have a much vaguer idea because when there's little money involved, you can't be that meticulous because there's too many variables that could stray from that. Because you haven't got 1,000, not 1,000, you haven't got 60 people on set to make sure everything's going to go right. You've got 5 or 6 people that are willing to get involved and stretch themselves really thin to make something that could be really cool. And you have to lean on those people and lean on the variables that aren't in your control. And I think that's really, and you learn so much because these happy accidents take place that are, just so surprising and so inspiring. And then that informs something later down the line where, I'll be doing a bigger job and I'll talk to a DP or a producer and be like, actually, I had this idea that came from one of our lower budget videos where we put some stuff in front of the lens or did something really wacky and it looked really cool. And then the big labels get excited by it. And all of a sudden you're like, that was totally worth it. Me doing, bending myself over backwards to make this low budget piece, which didn't get paid for, is now become a key component of this bigger budget piece,
Yeah. Well, I have like a couple different questions. One is like, so what is the difference between being a director and a director of photography?
Sure. So a director would be the person who, I guess, is steering the ship. Because I was going to say comes up with the idea, but sometimes you have writers or you have a brief. But it's the person that can sort of pull it all together, that has an idea, that has the overall idea in their heads, I guess, with all the ingredients in front of them. If the label want there to be, a performance and a narrative scene, and they want it to be in a specific place, you take those ingredients and you can see the final thing. You know that it's going to be shot a certain way and it's going to have certain colored lighting and the final grade is going to be a certain texture to it. You just have the vision in your mind, and therefore you can pull together the crew who can then best achieve that. So I'd say that the way it's like a pyramid, and it's like the director that's at the top, and not because he's the most important, but because he just is the brain of the operation and has to, if anyone comes up to him or her during a shoot, or them, and says like, well, why is this like this? The director has to know every inch of that idea so they can say, the reason we're doing it like this is because of this. You sort of thought about every reason something is happening. And so, for example, well, not even for example, but I suppose you've got this idea, you've got this concept, you've collaborated with the label, and now it's about bringing it to life. So you say, my first port of call would be to find, other than a producer, I guess, who's probably already I'm working with via my production company, it would be to find a director of photography. It'd be to find the person who's going to lens this whole piece, who's going to kind of take your overall idea and say, well, this is how we're going to achieve it with light and lenses and cameras and things. And that is essentially a director of photography's role. They're not really involved in the story or the narrative side of it, really. They're just taking what you've got in your head or on paper and finding a way to project that onto a screen. Essentially, they're trying to, you're saying, if I'm saying I want it to be really fast paced and energetic and like frenetic, they're going to be like, okay, that's handheld and probably, and if I'm like, I want it to be really dramatic and really shadowy, they're like, okay, well, that's going to be a lot of hard light then, and we'll use a lot of beams. And or I might say I want it really smooth and elegant and really poppy and bright, and they're like, okay, well, that's going to be steady cam and soft light and maybe pastel colors and that that kind of stuff. So they're just taking what you're doing and translating it just in a visual side of things. And then they'll pick their gaffer. In England, I'd say we'd have a gaffer, I suppose. And that's their sort of head of lighting, essentially. And then the DP will say to the lighting guy, like, so I'm going to go for something soft here. And then the lighting guy will be like, well, this specific lamp will do that. And it becomes this trickle-down effect where you have your heads of department. So your director of photography, your gaffer who does lighting, your art director who's just doing props and styling and production design. I guess your colorist is another head of department. You'd have all these people that are, and then within those people, they'll have their assistants and suddenly the crew is expanding. But really your first port of call is going to be for me, would be my director of photography and my producer and my assistant director. And often having an assistant director, they're just essentially being your voice on set. So you can stay focused and they can run around and say in 10 minutes, we need this person to be here. And in half an hour, we need to be wrapping for lunch. They're just keeping an eye on things in a more bird's eye point of view. But so on set, often I don't talk to anyone, but if on a big set, director of photography, assistant director, and a producer. And then there's like 57 other people milling about that I just assume are doing something really important to serve the thing I'm making. But it makes it less overwhelming when you realize that it's all just a trickle down effect. You're just going to say this to that person, they're going to say it to that person, and then that becomes this, and then you watch it just take place because you have these amazing skilled people that are running around and putting it together. I've probably explained that so badly, but it
made a lot of sense. Yeah.
But yeah, it's but when I guess because I started by doing directing and shooting, I have a love for both of those processes. I don't love doing them at the same time because I feel like when you're directing, you're looking at performance, and when you're shooting, you're looking at composure, and you can't really do those things at the same time. If I'm holding a camera and I'm trying to keep the artist in a certain place in the frame because it looks amazing, I'm not really watching what they're doing. I'm just watching their placement.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it difficult I always walk away and watch the final thing and think I've missed some things here because I was focusing on the wrong thing. But I love shooting and I love directing. So to do those separately, I really enjoy. And more recently, in the last couple of years, I've been getting, booked just as a director of photography. And it doesn't happen all that often because it's not my main thing, what I'm known for. But I think the people I've worked with have really enjoyed it because I have an affiliation to directing. Yeah. And although it's not my role on that day to do that, I know sometimes what the director's going through, and I always want to serve them more so than my own ego or my own ideas of what the visual should be. And I think it also helps me develop a better language because I'm sure I don't know what level of videos filmmaking you're doing at the moment, but the more people get involved, the more sometimes your idea runs away from itself. And because you've not translated them, the best way for it to happen or the way you see it. And so by shooting or being a director of photography, I know so much more about lighting now. So my shorthand with a director of photography on set when I'm directing can be so much quicker, and I can have such an understanding with them on why something might take longer to set up or why they're choosing a certain light for something. I can see that and in my head go, I totally understand why you're choosing that, and I don't need to second guess it or question it because so it's amazing. And I feel like I've been blessed because I've worked with so many great director of photography, director of photographers, DPs over the years that I've kind of learned from them. And I think I've almost had like the best teachers, like dozens of the best teachers over the years to just sort of teach me about light and about composure.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's like one organism, just so many people working together. And it totally makes sense that like once you've worn all these different hats and you kind of understand everything better, then you can have more concise ideas and everything, how everything works.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it wasn't always that way though. When I first moved from doing, 1, 2, 3 person crews to like having, I guess at that point, maybe 10 or 15, 20 people on set. Mm-hmm. When I first started doing the bigger briefs, I didn't enjoy it at all because I hadn't figured out how to translate that properly. I just felt like the whole time everyone was taking too long and they weren't doing it how I thought I was telling it to them. And I became really frustrated and I didn't enjoy it. And it took me a long time to understand how to translate my idea clearly and concisely and to choose the right people. And now I really enjoy it, but it definitely was a hard process for me to relinquish control. Mm-hmm. Because you are having to trust and lean on these people and their skill set, which is by far greater than mine. But it sometimes feels like you're fighting a little bit because they get quite passionate about their ideas, and rightly so. They're trying to make the best thing with you, and you have to sometimes trust them, even if you think it's the wrong idea. If a production design is saying it should be this color for this reason, and you're like, well, in my head it was a totally different color. It's like they're saying it because they've done 1,000 of these and they really know. Whereas I have an inkling and I'm like, okay, I'm going to let go of this for a second because this person they have a much better, and they have a reason as well. They're not saying it to annoy me. They're saying it because they genuinely have a better idea. And now I really, exactly. Yeah. And they've done their 10,000 hours in that field and I haven't. So I think, and now I really enjoy it. I really enjoy getting surprised by what people bring to the table, and because it's probably going to exceed my expectations by tenfold. So.
Would you say that you're introverted or extroverted?
That's really difficult. I think I am an extrovert, but I think it's a hat I put on because I also am someone who can be quite anxious and quite, I can recoil quite a bit, depending on what the situation is. I think I've learned to be extroverted through the work.
Yeah.
And just through, I guess, being in bands over the years as well. You can't really be an introvert in a rock band, really. And I was the front man as well. So it kind of like, I've kind of really enjoyed using these like spaces to have a confidence. When even though deep down I'm not that, I'm not that self-confident. I'm not that, I don't have much self-esteem. But I find in those situations I can sort of assume it. Probably much like, David Bowie in the supermarket was probably very different to David Bowie on the stage.
Yeah.
It's similar. I feel like I can assume this person that's a bit more outgoing, and I genuinely enjoy it because I feel like I'm in a space where it's calling for me to do that. And then I quite enjoy coming back and hiding away and not being that loud, obnoxious person and running around telling people what to do.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Cause I cannot imagine being a director or like lead a team or a group in that kind of situation. Yeah. Just because I'm so introverted and I don't feel comfortable. Like, I mean, you're not exactly just bossing people around, but like,
but you're right though. But I think you're totally right though. But it's what I was saying before about having your sort of direct heads of department. That kind of sometimes removes the need to be this bombastic, loud person on set. I really don't enjoy shouting. I'm not a shouter. And I don't particularly think people do their best work when they're being shouted at to do it. Yeah. I think conversations work better and people can ask questions and then it might take 5 minutes longer, but you're going to get better results. I've worked with introverted directors as a DP and it's fascinating. They have a different sensibility to me. And I think they take a bit more time thinking about what they're going to say and how they're going to say it. But it means when they do say it, it's the right thing. And it's like, and everyone's listening because they don't talk much on set other than them saying, hey, I think we should try this differently, or I think maybe we should do it over here. And I think the beautiful thing is when you get to a level where you have a huge crew, you don't really need to be, like, you have other people that are the voices. I remember when I came to LA went to LA in 2016, I think it was, and it was my only video I've shot there for this artist called Outer Sight. And I'd never worked with an American crew, and I was worried about, because although I am extroverted on set, I'm not, like I said, a shouter. I'm not a hype man. I don't like run around and like, gas people up. I'm just kind of like, I think we should do this and this is why. And I'm confident about it, but it's not like, but I had this amazing first AD, assistant director, who became the sort of hype man on set. He was running around, jumping around and getting everyone really excited. And I was like, that's great, because I couldn't have done that. I couldn't be that person, but the set needed it. We had, 20 or 30 extras who all needed to dance as if they were at some sort of like party. And you just can't be in the background being like, can you guys party a little bit now, please? Yeah. Like you need someone who's like, everyone get up and dance and jump around. And he was amazing for that. And I was so thankful, because it was such a worry for me to go to a place where, I hadn't worked with American crews before. It's a slightly different process to working in the UK. And it was just, I was just very lucky to have someone who could become that. And I think, and that's why I think I would say you'd never have to worry about being an introvert or ever worry that an introvert can't be a director. I think quite the opposite. I think sometimes introversion is like, introversion? Is that maybe a thing? I'm not sure. Is a really wonderful tool. I think it means that there's just a bit more thought going into things. And often that means everything comes out better. Whereas I'm a little bit more frantic and excited. I'm like a puppy. I think someone said my there's like a color test thing, and apparently I'm yellow, I think, which is like this, like a sunflower, sunchild, like
golden retriever.
Exactly like a golden retriever. Yeah. And I think that can become hopefully infectious on set, because people get excited by my excitement. But equally it means we do end up just getting sidetracked sometimes, because we're running around going crazy, being like, "This looks great. Let's shoot over here," and
Yeah.
but yeah,
Well, it sounds like fun.
it is fun. Yeah, it's good fun.
And I just wanted to backtrack a bit where you said that it took you 5 years to find your kind of filmmaking voice. But I guess in the grand scheme of things, that actually isn't like a long time. Like you made it sound like it's a really long time, but
yeah, no, it's
actually
not.
not really.
I think because I did 5 years of education in film,
yeah.
and 4 of them were not a waste of time, but I wasn't trying. I think that to me feels like it took too long to find my voice because but maybe I just wasn't looking for it, I think. And so actually, when I really think about it, this is me backtracking on my own answer. I think, I guess all of that stuff I'd learned had seeped in. I just didn't have a way to execute it. And I think, actually by that 5th year, when I suddenly got the kind of bug for it, I guess all of it was there. All the tools were already in me. So I had so much to dip in and to use. Because a lot of people asked me afterwards whether they recommended pursuing education in film. And I think there's like, it's a pro and con situation. I think I would have got further quicker if I'd just gone and done it as a career straight away and maybe worked my way up. But then equally, I have no idea whether the reason I have my voice and the way my films look a certain way or whatever is because I had all of that time to learn about film making and to go out and practice and make silly films with my friends. I don't know. I don't really know if my style is a result of that process or something else. So
yeah,
it's tricky.
Because I will say that because I studied flute in university.
Okay.
I got a music performance degree, and so I did a bachelor's, I did a master's, and I don't think I actually I have a completely different relationship with the flute now. After graduating, after finishing all my degrees, because of Twitch, really, and the pandemic, you can't play with anybody, and I love composing, and I started recording and playing on top of myself, and then I could take it out of the classical world and put it in a different context, and I think at that point, that's how I found my voice with flute playing, and I could be more expressive and all of that. But because of all the schooling, I think similarly in a way, I've been given all the tools to be able to play my instrument well. But it wasn't but I don't think I was able to be expressive or free with the music while I was still in school.
No, but I think
not
by
until
learning,
after.
Yeah, I think you said it quite rightly though. I think when you've learned something so well or to such a high standard, you're then kind of able to go outside the lines and find a more interesting way of doing something. I think innovation comes from knowing something really well and then I guess being able to step outside of the guidelines or the kind of parameters of that instrument. I think some of the best things are made that way. When I hear interviews with Justin Vernon and stuff, it's it's amazing because they sort of say they've mastered some instruments and they're like, well, let's try and use the instrument in a wrong way, right? And because they're such proficient players and they understand the instrument so well, them playing it the wrong way is never going to sound bad. It will sound really interesting. And I think vice versa. I imagine with the flute, it's once you've got it to such a high standard, not even just the flute itself, but other instruments, when you understand music in a certain way to a high standard, you're able to kind of just move outside the lines a little bit. And that's where all the fun stuff is.
Exactly.
It's the other way. So,
but also, just going out and doing it could be more helpful than sitting in a lecture room hall and studying and being forced. Yeah.
Exactly. But I think there's pros and cons to both. And I for a long time said to everyone, when younger people would email me and say do I go to college or do I'd always say, no, don't go to college. It's a waste of time. I wasted 5 years there and didn't learn anything. And now I look back and I'm like,
well,
I've realized I know so much about film. And I'm like, well, where did I learn that? Because I didn't just pick it up afterwards. I think by the point I was out of university, I stopped researching into the hows and whys of film. And I just would go and do. And I'd learn from the mistakes. But all the other stuff, the theory must have I think I already had a platform and a basis for that. So I think it's probably really important to know those things, because then you sort of have an understanding of when is it right to go off the path and when is it right to stay on the path. And but
I guess it'd be nice. It's nice to have a grasp of kind of everything in general, have a good foundation, and then do whatever after.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's what comes after is the most interesting part. And I think a lot of people, they're not sure when they finish university or when they have their degree, it's like, that's the hard part. And I think that's actually where you're brave enough to step outside the box. You can find a really interesting thing, and you found a really interesting thing to do with your skill and with your degree. And I think, and maybe out of necessity, like you said, it was the pandemic, and it's like, but sometimes having these, I guess, these boxes gives you these ceilings that you can't go past. It gives you a sort of a space to do something in, because otherwise it's just an overwhelming amount of possibilities. And it's like, well, I could do anything. And then when you have a limitation, it's like, okay, I have to work within the limitation. So, and that's often when the best stuff happens, because you don't just sit in front of a blank page being like, I don't know what to do.
So I know that you filmed a documentary for Orla Gartland. Like, how is that different from, because you mainly do music videos, right?
Yeah.
How is that?
I think that was an amazing experience, because it was at Middle Farm Studios, which is where Meadowlark first recorded, and I'd been friends with Pete, who runs that studio for a decade, so it was a really comfortable space, and I knew it so well that I knew working in that space would be comfortable for me, comfortable for Orla. I think as well as a musician, I kind of understood the process of making an album, and it's different for everyone. You know, you're going through that experience right now. Orla's going through that. That was her first experience of it. I think I kind of just knew where to put the camera, I think, to capture what I felt was an honest portrayal of that. And actually the whole format for that documentary was out of a limitation, because I couldn't make it for the whole thing. And I was like, and I didn't want to not be involved in it. So I suggested to Orla if she records all of it on VHS, so it has a texture to it. It has this home video feel. And then I'll come in on the last day and I'll do a sort of reflective day of shooting, which we can sort of weave in and out the story. So you're always going back to this final day when she's learned everything through the process. And then you're going back to this crazy, frenetic home video footage of her and everyone just goofing about in the studio. But it was this really nice merriment of what an album actually is like. It's like, it's really silly and fun and crazy and late nights and just like random stuff happening. But then there's this really serious part at the end when you're reflecting on the thing you've made and like how important this is going to be for you and your career and for yourself. And I think the film really like works for that reason. I don't think I would have captured all the chaos in the same way they did with each other, because they were so, she had a band there and they knew each other far better than I know them all. And when there's an alien presence in the room, you're always going to get people who freeze up. And luckily Orla's, like, we know each other a little bit, so it helped, but I would never have got the honesty, that they got from it. And it's such a fun piece. And I had so I finished filming it, and there was no budget to make it really. I think Orla was very gracious and gave me some money afterwards to say thank you, which I divided up to the people that were involved. But at the time I was like, I'll film it. I'll get the, 10 tapes of VHS and I'll transfer those to digital and I'll edit it. And so I went through all the footage, which was like, I think in total about 4 hours. Once I took every best moment from every clip, it was about 4 hours on the timeline. And I just looked at it and I was like, I am so overwhelmed. I don't know how to make a story from this.
And it's a 25-minute video, right?
It's insane. And so I passed it on to my friend, Ant Thornton, who I grew up with. He was actually at university with me. And he went and did a band that got quite successful. And then the band broke up and he was a postman for a little bit. And then he's now gone back into filmmaking again. So it was a really wonderful, and that was his first project kind of back, was him editing this film for me. And he did such a good job. I just could not have found a way to cut all of that stuff out and figure out what the important stuff is without him. It was such an overwhelming task. And he spent he added it up. It was something crazy, like 100 and something hours or something editing it. But we're both so proud of it. And I think it was really nice that Orla was so proud of it. And we screened it in like a little cinema in London. And like, it's just, I just now have such a fond memory of that process because I got my favorite collaborators involved right at the end. And, you know, Anne edited it. And then I was like, well, this looks so good now that we should get my friend to do the sound mix. And so the JJ, who produced Meadowlark's first record, did the sound mix for it. And then my friend Cam, who's a colorist, who's just got into like the industry, I was like, could you have a look at this too? And he was like, of course. And we just kind of all got involved, and it was a really fun piece.
That's amazing.
I mean, it'd be interesting to know actually, I mean, obviously it's difficult because you're sat in front of the person who made it, but when you watched it, did you, as a musician, what did you get from it? Like, was it mostly interesting to see Orla's life, or did you feel like there was a really interesting angle of just understanding how a record's made in that situation? Like what kind of, I'm just curious. There isn't a right or wrong answer for that. I'm just curious about what someone who's watched it took from it.
I think is more about just like Orla's life and like being able to see into what it's like for her being a musician and like her journey and what got her to that moment of making an album. And I mean, and also what goes into it. But I think I was more interested in just the fact that this is like her life. She's showing a piece of her life. Because I'm also a huge fan of Orla, and like her music's amazing. And I am always super interested in like the details of production and how a song comes together, what people do, how they mix it. Like I'm super interested in all that stuff too. But like, I think what got me most was just seeing her and like how she felt in all of this, and like even just you talking about it, I got goosebumps again.
It's really interesting. I just remembered the first, we put like a sizzle reel at the start, which kind of gets people who maybe haven't heard of Orla before, like up to speed with who she is and what she's done, you know. And that idea came so late into the video. We'd made the documentary, and then I remember thinking like, I really want someone who doesn't know who Orla is to be able to watch this and go very quickly understand the stakes of it. Like kind of, I mean, not the stakes, but like it felt for some reason when Orla did a record that it was more important than a lot of other artists. Maybe because she's independent as well, and she's just been grafting so hard for so long. It's such a high standard as well. Like she's, you know, she's never missed with like how good all of her songwriting and production is, and all the content she puts out. So I was like, I kind of want this to be a summary that then is like chapter 2, like Orla album 1, and then what happens after that is like from this moment onwards. So it's actually really cool that you got that from her as well, from in the piece, because she's very personable, but equally I was like conscious that I really wanted it to be she's quite open anyway, but this was intimate in another way. And I really was really proud that we managed to, that was our intention, was to make it feel very intimate and for people to kind of really see behind the curtain with her, and not not kind of like overly curate it so that it makes the best picture. It's like more just like, here's just what it was like every day to do this thing.
And definitely I think that using the VHS and like just having them, giving them the camera and just having them film themselves, like that was a really smart thing to do. I mean, you were saying you couldn't even be there, so
I couldn't. Like, there was no other way to do it.
Kind of had to be that way.
But I didn't want my lack of presence to be the thing that ruined the piece. I was like, I need to look at this as a variable, not a limitation. And I think it just became an ingredient or a component rather than and I think I would have done a worse if I was there shooting every day, knowing how much I shot on just one day. If I was there for like 2 or 3 weeks, it just would have been too much. I don't know. I wouldn't have better it would just been nothing. I think it would have been just too long and drawn out and boring. I think the merriment of chaos, which Orla is, along with her like professionalism, which also she is. Somehow she is like the epitome of both those two things. Like someone who is so business savvy and smart and professional, who also has the most fun I've ever seen whilst doing what she does. So it's like,
Yeah, the energy is pretty contagious. It's amazing.
Yeah. Have you seen her live?
No, I haven't.
Oh, well, I wasn't sure because she was over in the States with actually, I don't know. Has she played the States yet? I'm not sure. She's done a headline tour there. I can't remember.
I don't think so, but she was playing with Dodie.
She was playing with Dodie.
I'm up in Canada, in Calgary, and like
oh, of
nobody
course.
comes
Yeah, sorry,
here,
I totally forgot you're not actually in the States. Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully you get a chance because it's something else live. It's like there's some. She does something where the room become like everyone becomes a member of the band essentially. Like that's what it feels like. Everyone is a safe space to sing and to dance and to laugh, and she somehow managed to shrink the stage to like it feels like you're all playing on the same level, even though you're just watching. But I'm a huge fan anyway, so it's like I've always been a big fan of Orla. It was really funny. I watched her first ever band gig. Like, I think it was her first, or the first time she was on in-ear monitors. I think at this festival we played years and years ago, and she was just amazing. It was like the best thing I've ever seen. I couldn't believe it, and I knew prior to her going up there that it was a new thing. She had all these new band members, and it was a big thing for her. And we ran backstage after she finished, and we were all like buzzing, like, oh my God, like, and she just burst out crying. She's like, that was so bad. She's like, that was so bad. I ruined it. I'll never play again. And I was just like, absolutely not. Like she obviously had, I think her ears kept falling out and she kept thinking she was messing up. And no, I was like, I'm a savvy musician. I didn't notice at all. And I was just like, I felt so sad that she didn't get to share the experience we were having on her first band gig. But obviously since she's just like, I mean, she owns the stage. It's insane.
She's killing it.
Yeah.
We'd love to get her on the podcast also.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be totally cool. I mean, I'm sure she's such an interesting person to talk to. I'm sure that would be easy to do.
Yeah.
But she's also very busy. So it's like,
I know. Yeah.
9 times out of 10 when I text her, it's always like, she's like in between like doing 1,000 things at once. So
I mean, she went on tour with Dodie in the States, and then didn't she just continue to do her own Europe tour?
Whilst she was out there, she was like recording songs as well, and like I just don't know how I literally don't know how she does it. It's like, yeah, she's probably the hardest working woman in show business, I think. Like, especially because she's independent. I mean, it blows her mind that she just hasn't such a small team around her. But it means that when she asked me to get involved with the live videos I shot at Middle Farm, I don't know if you saw I think Dodie was in the videos as well. We did like Zombie and Madison and 2 other songs. And, you know, I remember her saying like, you know, I'm really sorry. She kept apologizing. Like, I don't have like the budgets like a label would have. And I'm like, dude, I would pay you to come and do this. Like I know the kind of fun we're going to have making this thing and how collaborative she is in terms of like every aspect of what she does. And it was such like the best 2 days being there doing those, because like you sort of get to become a part of the band, like because the videos are one take. The stakes were as high for me getting my take right as it was for them playing it right. So it's like this really symbiotic thing, and again something I love doing because it's just the energy is like you feel like you're playing an instrument with the camera, because you're kind of like finding a place to put it and mapping out a journey where it should be at different parts of the song, and how do you make it interesting if it's just one angle or one camera move. So it's really fun.
It definitely came across the videos.
Zombie was chaos. It was like I don't think they even planned the dance thing. They just broke into it, and I was like, oh my God, like the dancing, I need to run back in and capture this. But it was so fun. And the Madison session was like just unreal. Like they wanted to do Madison. And that was like a couple that we did like two or three takes, or maybe it was take 5 actually. It was 2 of the takes we stopped right at the start because the clouds came over.
Oh, okay.
So it was like they are just that good. There's like just like one mic, or it was like 2 mics, like a stereo pair going into the tape machine. Just like it just blows my mind. I was like couldn't really believe I was there witnessing that. Like that, but what it sounded like was so good. And actually what we captured is such an accurate feeling and how it looked and sounded, you know. It was, you know, at the end of it they break into like they're laughing because they can't believe they just did it, and it's like really sweet, and I'm just big fan.
It's amazing. So a couple of Patreon questions to wrap this up. So Phuong asks, what has been the greatest obstacle that you've had to overcome?
The greatest obstacle I've had to overcome. That is a really deep and interesting question. I think my own self-doubt and imposter syndrome. And it's not something I've necessarily overcome. It's something I am overcoming. I'm not sure it's possible because it keeps changing. The goalposts keep moving, but that was something that I really and still do struggle with. And I feel quite triumphant just finishing a job because I'm just like, wow, I actually made it through there without messing something up to the point where the project had to stop. It's like, but it is something I'm talking about with my therapist actually about trying to realign that thought a little bit with not going in with so many expectations that I think are going to go wrong. It's like I'm almost expecting things to go wrong, and then I'm almost I'm not self-sabotaging, but I'm catastrophizing. And I think I'm trying to realign my thoughts a little bit. So yeah, but imposter syndrome is very real and quite difficult. When you're a director, you sort of don't. It feels quite flimsy, I think, because you're not holding a camera and you're just a voice in the room, essentially. You're just a person with an idea, and they're often made up and a little bit silly. So you're like, it feels kind of like, well, why have they picked me to do this? Like it feels like anyone could do this, and I'm sure someone would have a better better voice for it. And it's all, especially when it's lots of money involved, you're kind of like, this is absurd. Like, why is someone paying this much money for me to like make my silly little idea? So it's quite hard to overcome that. And I think just by the more I do it, the more I'm learning that, well, I've somehow managed to sustain myself in this. So I can't be as bad as my brain is saying I am, or I haven't messed up as much as my brain tells me I'm going to.
Right.
And therefore
you have the proof there.
Kind of, yeah. But it is a constant, I have to keep reminding myself. And so yeah, I think that's probably the biggest obstacle, and still it continues to be the biggest obstacle I have to battle with.
Phuong also asks, do you think that creativity is a part of human nature, or is it something that must be nurtured and learned?
That's interesting, because not everyone is creative. And maybe they, or at least don't display it in a way that is applicable to the creative fields that we are used to. So I don't really know. I think I was certainly encouraged when I was very young to be creative. And not necessarily like because we had any creative people in the family, but if I did something that was remotely creative when I was very young, I was praised for it, and my family would get excited by it. And I think maybe I quite enjoyed the result of doing something creative, the kind of like how that would make people laugh or cheer or whatever it was. They would react in a way. It was like creating a reaction. And I think, so I do believe there was some nurture in that. But then equally, so many of my creative friends have like ADHD, and like there's certain traits I think that just spark creativity from people. I'm not saying everyone who's creative has ADHD, but I was noticing there's just similar traits of people that I connect with. If I connect with someone for the first time and I don't know what they do, and we really get on, they usually drop a bombshell like, by the way, I'm a painter, or I'm also a songwriter. I'm like, that figures because we've just had this really big connection, and I don't often get that with other people. I don't know if you've ever done the personality test before.
Yeah.
I can't remember what code I am, but it's like, it's
the
interesting that
MBTI thing.
Yes,
one?
Exactly that. I think I'm like INFP something, or EN. I can't remember, and if I get it wrong, it could be the wrong thing altogether. But I need to retake it to remember what it is. But when I speak to friends and when I connect with people and we have really deep, great conversations, often I ask what their like, personality code is or whatever, and it's like it's usually one that fits with mine in some capacity, or is complementary to what mine is or close to it. It's rare that I'd connect in a really deep and meaningful way and create a long friendship from someone who is very polar opposite on that chart. And I'm a very friendly person. I can get on with everyone, but it's the sort of continued deepness of a friendship or how that blossoms is definitely from people that are more like-minded. So I do believe there's also, and to circle that back, I think creativity is a part of that. It's a way you think about things. It's not just lateral. It's like, I don't know. Again, it's like you step outside the lines a little bit, because that's where creativity exists.
Yeah.
I don't think there's creativity doesn't always exist in formality, I don't think. And people might say it does because you could learn grade 8 piano and only stick to that and play like concerts and stuff. But that's because what they're probably playing is a piece of music that was written out of a heat of creativity, like of abstract thinking and abstract playing. And, it wasn't put together by numbers and notes and bits on paper and stuff. It was certainly played that way, but it often when things are written, it's out of your sort of subconscious and
right.
Yeah. So I don't have a solid answer for that one, but I do think it's probably a bit of both. I'm sure there is someone who's probably studied it a lot harder than I have. I'm just speculating, but it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting debate.
Yeah.
And I think everyone would have an interesting answer to that. And I'd love to actually take that question and ask other people because I think everyone would have a really interesting answer of whether it's either or.
I personally think that everybody is creative. I think it's part of human nature. Also, I'm INFJ, if anybody cares.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I wish I remember what mine is, but I've forgotten over the years and didn't ever wrote it down. So,
redo the test and let me know.
I will. I'll message you because it's. I remember.
It's interesting
when I did it for the first time, probably in like 2014 or something. When I read the blurb at the end, it said, "Don't get scared when you read this because it will feel like we've like spied on you or something." And I read it and I was like, "This is absurd! I can't believe how much this is like looking in a mirror." Essentially, it was so accurate to the way I am, which is and especially after answering just a couple of multiple choice questions. So it's like,
right,
or not even they're not multiple choice. They're like kind of on a scale, like
right, yeah,
very likely or unlikely, and it's fascinating. But
yeah, I do think that like even though if everybody is creative, I think that it's not necessarily nurtured though in some aspect, and so some people don't get to explore that side. They don't get to explore the creativity in them, and so they're led to believe that they aren't creative.
You're probably right. It probably is a lot of a societal thing. Yeah, because we are kind of told to be more formal as adults, to kind of be more regimented and strict. And I think one thing I'm a big firm believer of is kind of like not to lose the child in yourself, to be silly and fun and to not be too serious, because I think life is serious anyway. There's taxes and whatever. It's just life is difficult. So I think to try and find the lightness in it and to the non-seriousness of it is like way more interesting and something I just constantly adopt in myself, to not try and lose sight of that kind of. And I think you're probably right. I think if that's not nurtured and it doesn't remain, then you probably would be less inclined to your creativity would become dormant essentially.
Right.
Because you're right. When you go back to school and you're in like the first couple years, everyone's painting, everyone's building Lego, like and that's abstract creativity. That's like just make whatever you want to make, draw whatever you want to draw. No kid's ever going to go, well, I can't. I need you to tell me what I'm drawing. They're always going to just put the paint. And some will just excel in it in a certain way that becomes distinguished, and other people will just won't. But I think you're totally right. I think creativity does exist in everyone, but it can disappear, not completely, but will be buried, I guess, by the expectations of society.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. DJ asked, what drives you to live the life you have chosen, and how much might that have changed over the years?
What drives me? I think, again, very deep, interesting question. You have people ask very, very good questions. It's
they always do.
Yeah, it's what drives me. I think I enjoy learning, and obviously when we finished school, I was never really into academic learning, but creative learning fascinates me. I think learning from mistakes and finding a new way to do the same thing is just incredible to me. How, despite writing hundreds of songs, I can still find a new way to do that and get excited by it. And same with films. It's like I find 1,000 different ways to point the camera at someone and still get excited by it. And I think that drives me because it's like, it's such a reward, and it's not really a reward that needs critics to praise it, because it's a reward that happens before they even see it. The reward comes from just being like, oh my God, we just did this. Or it comes even earlier than that. Sometimes I listen to a song and a new idea blossoms in my head. I'm like, wow, I would never have thought of doing that if I hadn't listened to that song and maybe looked at a certain photograph or piece of art or something and become inspired simultaneously. So yeah, I think that drives me to continue to do it and to not get bored from doing it. I think if I ever became complacent, I'd probably stop doing the thing, because I wouldn't get anything from it. It would become stale and old and ultimately boring. And I think I need to be excited by it. I think it's self-diagnosed, but I think I have a sort of a level of ADHD in me. So I need to be stimulated by new things constantly. So to kind of be in two lines of work where that's kind of the goal is quite helpful. So yeah.
Yeah. It's something else to be inspired by yourself and what you've previously made or what you're making. I think it's such an amazing experience to feel that and to be able to continue to make new things from that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as well, because I usually hate what I make for about 6 months.
Really?
Roughly. It differs, but I usually finish a project and I can't love, even when I have other people involved, because I think you spend so long seeing what went wrong. But no shoot's ever perfect. It's impossible for it to be perfect. So you end up looking at the video and remembering all the mistakes that happened, and they become scars almost, or like cuts. Maybe not scars, they become cuts. And then I think after 6 months or so, or any amount of time, I guess, you forget about the things that went wrong on set, and you start looking at the piece of work for what it is, just a piece of work, a piece of art, and a visual piece of art. And then you start realizing, you sort of see it differently. It's not a postcard for everything that went wrong. It's like it's just a thing you've made, and then you can see it slightly more objectively. So it's it's annoying, but it's nice that I can, at least after a certain amount of time, come back to my own work and sort of find things I like about it, or which is good. But it's that whole thing. I mean, it happens with music, right? It's you want to sound like everyone else except yourself. Yeah. And then other people hear your music and they're like, "What? You sound great." And you're like, "Yeah, but I don't sound like that person." And they are great. And it's hard to see it in yourself sometimes. But it also is good because maybe that keeps us more humble, and to not. I think if we loved ourselves that much, we probably would have. I don't think that's like a healthy, maybe in an art form, because you become arrogant, and therefore you believe everything you make is good. And I think that's a dangerous thing for artists. And a lot of the time when Meadowlark was more early on, and we were getting a lot of messages from younger artists, and they would say, why hasn't my song been playlisted on Spotify? Why haven't I been given these big gigs like you guys have? And there's a myriad of reasons why. But often it's probably because they're not looking inwards enough to correct a mistake, or or learning from failure. Rather than seeing, and failure is never nice, rejection is never nice, but we have to look at that sometimes and say, if you've written a song and no one wants to play it, it doesn't mean it's a bad song, but it means no one's connecting with it. And it means critically it's not a good song, because if you're making music for other people and they're all saying they don't like it, then the song is technically a failure. You might love it, and therefore for you it's not a failure, but that doesn't mean everyone else is going to love it. And I think recognizing, well, why isn't it someone's not connected, like people haven't connected to this song? If I'm making music for everyone else, why haven't they? And how can I learn from this thing and try again and make something else? And I think growing from that is where you can get to a place where, people then suddenly are liking your music, because you're trying to find a new way for it to connect. But some people have that one thing they think is great, and no one else thinks it's as great as they do, and they just keep pushing it because they believe so certainly that it is the thing that's going to be their song, be their hit. Yeah. And it's tricky, because with those people, that needs to be a self-found thing, because otherwise you're just adding more rejection to them. And too much of it means you get scared and you never write anything. You're like, "Oh, everything I make is rubbish and no one will like it." Yeah. But I think you have to have some confidence to be like, I know I've got it in me. It's just not this one. I'm just going to keep writing it. I'm going to keep writing and writing until one day I'm not having to ask anyone whether they like my song. People are coming to me and saying, I like your song. And then you're like, okay, fantastic. That means I've written something which is resonating. And that's, yeah. Sorry, that was quite a ramble then. Sorry.
No, it's good. I wonder like how many people who write or release music write for themselves versus writing for other people. Because I mean, I've always written for myself, and it just happened that some of my music connects with people. Yeah. But I never really put it out with the intention of wanting people to, like, I never wrote a song to be like, I hope you like this. Like, I hope you receive it well. It's like, exactly. I like it. And then they happen to see it and also like it.
Exactly, which is great. And I think the more songs you release, the more you'll probably naturally just see people gravitating towards certain, especially if you're experimenting with different styles or different songwriting styles as well. I think Meadowlark specifically, we sort of dabble in so many, not different genres, but different sounds. Like, we can have a song which is just Kate and a guitar, and then we can have a song that's like just tons of layered production.
Yeah.
And after a while, you start seeing a common thread of like what people are mostly gravitating towards. And it's sort of, it doesn't have to, but it can inform how you go forward sometimes. Because you're like, well, if that's what people are enjoying, maybe we should write more of that. I think for a long time, we got really hung up in writing for other people. I think even our first album kind of got carried away on itself. I think the record label they'd spent more on us than they probably should have for a band on an indie label. And I think that meant they were very keen for us to gain some kind of commercial success. And then with that means that every song on your record kind of needs a chance at radio. So every song needs a beat, every song needs to be 3.5 minutes. And without them saying it specifically, they sort of encourage it. And what that meant was the album became something which not every song was produced for the song, if that makes sense. It felt like it was produced for an agenda. Yeah. And I think we both maybe don't love the album as much as we should, because it represents us kind of fitting or following the wrong path, I think, which is the path for other people and expectations and money. And not because we specifically wanted to, I think because we felt like that was the way we had to do that in order to to exceed the expectations that were set for us. And then Nightstorm became a weird muddle, a mix of the two. And so I think us writing together now, there's so much clarity in why we're doing it. We're not fools to it now. We've had little moment of success. That's not even that. A taste of success at the start when we were offered like really big tours, even though we'd never released a song, and having stupid dinners with labels and things. And then sort of going through the opposite way and almost having failure dumped on us later. I was just saying to you about that person, how they would need to learn from that mistake. Ours was all backwards. And so where we are now is where we've learned from the mistake. And the mistake is writing music for any other reason than for yourself, because the songs are important to you, because that's all a song should be. And then if someone else connects with it, it just means that that's a shared story rather than a personal story. And I think that's just how songs should be. And then success might come from that. And that's really great, because that means more people are sharing that sentiment with you. But I'm also I'm also aware that we were looking at the bigger picture for so long. The idea of we need to have hundreds of thousands of Instagram likes and millions and millions of streams, some of which took place, but not for the right reasons. And I think what we forgot was some of the most important messages we ever received were from individuals who had connected with our songs on a very personal basis, or had used our songs for their first dances at weddings, and these moments that are pivotal in their life. Our music soundtrack that, and that's actually kind of more important than 1,000 people or hundreds of thousands of people sort of thumbs upping, like, we like your songs, cool. We listen to it sometimes and it's great. Like, I'd prefer a more condensed group of people that resonate in such a deep way with our music. And the more we write now together, the more we're wanting a deeper connection. And the songs are written about a deeper connection and the deeper side of the human condition.
Yeah.
So if only 10 or 15 people really connect with that, I hope that those people, if they do, that they want to connect with us, and we can just create a shared community about the human condition and how crazy it is, just how crazy life is.
Yeah.
I would prefer that than just 100,000 people saying, yeah, it was really cool. Like that's, I just don't think that's beneficial for us at this stage now. I think it's about closing that down a bit and sort of seeing the people that are connecting to it, and not just a mass of faceless people.
Right. Yeah. But I guess like you can only say that now because you've had that experience earlier on, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I said that to Kate the other day, actually. You can't almost instill that to anyone at the start, because everyone has to go through their journey. It's why I kind of don't like when someone says like, what should I do to get to this place? And it's like, just don't listen to anyone but yourself. Because you're going to have to make all your own mistakes and learn from them, and that's going to inform you later on. Because if you try and bypass the mistakes by someone telling you the route to go, if someone says 10 years into their career, these are all the mistakes I made, so don't make them, and you're spending the whole time sidestepping all these potential mistakes, you're just going to be going down this weird path that's not yours. And no person's route to success can be repeated. That's why we always see, for every Ed Sheeran, there's 2 years of quirky solo artists getting signed and technically commercially failing, because it's people are trying to just pick that route again, but it can't be done. It's like the door closes the second that person makes it, and then you have to try and find a new route, a new way to do it. And the artist, it is, but it's also kind of amazing because you're walking in a forest that has no path, which means the whole time it's like untrodden ground. It's amazing. It's like this. It's nerve-wracking, but it's exciting because it's almost like going to an ancient forest. I keep using forest. Maybe I don't know why it's in my brain. And and that no one has ever trodden on this ground before. Literally no one. You're the first person, like being on the moon for the first time or something. Like that's that. If you can make your path like that, where you feel like every time is you treading in a place that no one's trodden before, or you're looking for the parts of the forest that don't have a path, or there's no footsteps. You're like, that area's got no footsteps. That's where I should step. And then you step on it, and it's like, okay, like maybe it doesn't work. Maybe people don't react to that. But if they do, it means everyone's gonna be like, oh my God, like we never thought of that. And then everyone's gonna try and copy you and follow you, and you create, because you've done something that was not done before. Which is easier said than done in an era where everything's been done 1,000 times. Yeah. But every now and then these artists come through, then we're enamored with their success story, because we're like, how did they do it? And it's because they just went their own way in a very different route to everyone else.
I just put out a song called Lost in the Woods a month ago.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Pretty much about all that. Also, forest is, I don't know, in my Twitch community, I was doing some live composing for some time. And whenever I asked people for title suggestions or whatever, they would, or like the feel of the short little piece, everybody would say forest. So
interesting. So you feel like you emit that kind of, that sense, maybe that sensibility, maybe through yourself and through your songwriting.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting, because I feel like Meadowlark, for example, ours is always very water. Like, I don't know why and that's our own self, like that's us analyzing ourselves, but we gravitate towards water when we're writing, and imagery of water, and it feels watery. I can't tell you why.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and see whether it's a sea or a river or a lake, it kind of changes, but it's always very water based. But I get the sense from you. I mean, those wood metaphors and those forest metaphors would have come probably from, there's obviously something you're emitting which makes me feel of
would have
forestry. Yeah, would have. Exactly.
Have to get a pun in there.
Always, at least one.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for just being an amazing host and asking amazing questions. And it feels like I just feel like I've had a wonderful conversation with you. So
yeah,
thank you.
It was great getting to know you better. So where can people find you on the internet?
I mean, probably the easiest place. I have a website, which is www.danielbroadleyfilms.com. I'm also fairly proactive on my Instagram, which is @DanielBroadley. And yeah, if people have specific questions, I either DM me or email me. I'm fairly open to conversations and sharing what I know. I always feel like there's no point keeping secrets, basically. If people want to know something and I can help in some way, then I'm always up for that. So
amazing. Cool. Thank you.
Cool. No worries. My pleasure.